So at one point, Jeffrey sits up abruptly and his whole demeanor changes. He becomes more authoritative and he says, "You're doing it wrong." Something in me shut down and I started to freeze and go numb at that point. When he was done, he got up very abruptly. I don't remember what happened between him walking out and me getting up, feeling like I didn't do anything wrong, but this feels really disgusting right now. And I felt so confused. And that's when I just burst out into tears. That man was a master manipulator already. He was already utilizing tactics to abuse girls and young women.
Welcome to True Crime Prevention, the podcast that melds true crime with real solutions. Let's expose how all crime starts the same way, with a chance. Today, we won't give it a chance. I'm Paul Del Ponte, and I work with McGruff the Crime Dog. Thanks for joining us. We're especially fortunate to have with us what I think is going to be a really fabulous episode that gets at some of the hearts and details around something that you've all been hearing day in, day out on the news, and that is the Jeffrey Epstein case. Today, we're going to be talking to Jess Michaels, a very courageous survivor of that, who is speaking out, started an organization, launched a safety app, and so many other things. We're going to be getting into Jess, and she'll be joined with Tracy, who is the CEO of something called Project Callisto, which is also out there helping victims. And today we're going to give them a voice. Before we do that, we're going to hear a little bit from one of our sponsors. Don't forget to click like and subscribe, and we will be right back with Jess.
This episode is brought to you by Safely. When it comes to personal safety, prevention is power, and confidence is everything. That's where Safely comes in, a company founded by women, for women, creating discreet, self-defense tools that fit right into your everyday life. Get empowered to take a bite out of crime with Safely products, like their best-selling Sidekick, an all-in-one safety device that combines pepper spray, an alarm, a flashlight, and a safety spike with a grip that secures it all to your hand. Safely wants you to do what you want, whenever you want, and to do it safely. So head to livesafely.co and use code PREVENTION for 10% off of your order. That's livesafely.co, code PREVENTION. Stay prepared, stay powerful, stay safely.
Jess, welcome, and thank you for joining our podcast today, True Crime Prevention. And most of all, thank you for your courage and as a survivor for doing something to help others. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my experience.
Great. And I know sharing is difficult because, as I understand it, you are suffering and have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder for all of what you've done. And part of it is what we really want our listeners and viewers to have a better understanding of is the diabolical nature of what happened, the mental process, the mental anguish, the time it took and the grooming and all of that. Why don't you bring us back to, a couple years before it all started happening in the early 90s? What were you doing then? What was your life like? And then before we get into the hard part.
Thank you. So in 1990, early 1991, I was a professional dancer and model. I was working consistently, traveling all over the world, had a very successful career. I was dancing with celebrities like MC Hammer, which back then was a big deal.
Great. Yeah.
and Aretha Franklin.
I want to believe there's a clip of MC Hammer and McGruff back in the day, but I'm not sure.
I was working consistently. I wasn't just an aspiring performer. I was a working, successful performer. I had fabulous relationships and my career trajectory was on the way up. I was very proud of myself. I was very confident. I was very assertive and felt very grateful for the life that I had and was really thriving. And then I came back from a dance contract. I can stop there if you want, if you have a question up to that, but I
keep going. That's an important background for people to have.
I think it
how
is.
together your life was and the trajectory.
Yeah. I think at the naive age of 22, I thought that if something terrible happened, I would be able to take care of myself. I could physically and was flexible enough. I was like, I could just throat kick anybody that would try anything on me. I could ninja my way like they show in the movies, I would be able to escape any kind of confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
That's how confident I felt in myself. So I returned from a trip. It was a contract in Tokyo dancing, and I had returned in May of 1991. And my roommate at the time, who was a very dear friend, was telling me all about this wealthy Wall Street guy that she was working for. She was also a professional dancer, and she was learning from him massage. And she was traveling with him all over the world, and he was letting her go to auditions and take contracts, and then she still would have a job when she came back. He was very flexible, and that's kind of the ideal job to have when you're a performer in New York. You want somebody that's going to let you, take off work at the last minute if a big audition comes up. You want them to let you come back to work if you leave on a 3-month, 4-month, 5-month contract. So it was this ideal job. She was getting to see the world, which for me was one of the reasons why I was dancing. I wanted to see the world and have somebody pay me to do it.
Right.
And so she's telling me all about this man, Jeffrey, and she says nothing but glowing things about him. She seems to like him, respect him, enjoy working with him. And I'm jealous. I think she has landed the perfect side hustle for a dancer. And this goes on for about 2 months of her telling me all about this guy and having all this money. I think she probably was in love with him. That's how much she seemed to like him. And it comes about in July that she says, "Hey, I got a dance contract, and I know Jeffrey needs some backup masseuses. Do you want to go? Do you want to learn massage? And do you want to meet him?" And I thought, yes, I jumped at the chance. So I meet him. And one of the ways I think this is so fascinating too, I actually am an avid journaler. So I kept all of my day planners from the late 80s, 90s while I was auditioning, because sometimes I didn't have time to journal. So I would write down who I met just quickly on the date that I met them. And so in my 1991 day planner, I have his name, his address, the phone number, and his assistant's name, all in my 1991 day planner. So I go to this address, and it's on Madison Avenue, and I go into what looks like not a millionaire's office. And that was fascinating to me because it was very low key, not decorated, very simple, and almost like an old metal school teacher like desk. And right? I thought this, I was like, is he really a millionaire? And so I sit down, and he's very stoic, and he's very serious.
And for those not familiar with Manhattan, Madison Avenue is one of the main avenues. In the business district, you have the very beautiful looking New York Life building, a lot of advertising agencies, rich stores further up Madison Avenue. So yes, what you're describing is not what one would expect from a wealthy financier with an office on Madison Avenue.
Exactly. And I believe that is, then he becomes disarming. I believe it was a strategy.
Part of the plan.
And so I sit down, and after his assistant brings me into his office, and he is very stoic and very professional and very serious about, asking me questions about body parts and this type of massage, and had I heard about these international techniques. And I was feeling insecure in what I knew. And I remember thinking, wow, I don't know as much as I thought I did about the body, even I'm a professional dancer. And this man knows more than I do. And so what I know now is he was really setting himself up as the authority. And he led me to believe in that moment, well, I don't know if you know enough to get this job. I wasn't sure that I was winning him over and hiring me. I kind of thought I had an in because of my friend who had introduced me. So
and you're obviously there with the mindset, I want this job.
I want this job. Yes, this is an ideal job for me. This is the perfect job for me. So he says, okay, come over here around to the back of the desk. So I go around, and he opens the drawer of his desk, and in the drawer are dozens of the same book, the Book of Massage. And he says, you're going to have to study this book. And so he gives me the book. I don't know if I have the job, but I'm also an overachiever. And so once you give me a task, I know I can succeed at it. So I left the office, went and got a 3-subject notebook, went right home, started studying it, making notes in this 3-subject notebook. And my roommate and friend comes home and she says, Jeffrey liked you. So you're going to just call the office and make an appointment for a trial massage next week. So I had a full week to study this book and I am doing it. And I'm making even a cheat sheet for myself to be able to take with me when I go to do this trial massage. So I make up a whole massage plan, what order I'm going to do things in, what different techniques I'm going to show to him. So I am matching what I believe is his professional level that he established. And so I get the address. It's a different address. And I end up at this Upper East Side penthouse. And I walk in and I've never seen anything like it at that time at 22 years old in 1991. It was a sunken in living room and there were floor to ceiling windows that just looked all around the city. And in that moment, I said, oh, I guess he is really a millionaire. It was a moment of recognizing that he had the upper hand. If we want to look at this a little bit more clinically, just that it was the moment where he showcased, I am in charge here. This is my wealth. And he comes out in a bathrobe with a towel. I always share this part because I think it's really important to understand, again, the psychology of it. He says, I say to him, being who I am, that assertive young dancer, I say, so Jeffrey, obviously, why do you hire professional dancers to do massage when clearly you can hire professional masseuses? And he says, oh, well, dancers have such beautiful bodies. They know how to take care of themselves. They know more about the body than most do. And you wouldn't want a fat personal trainer, would you? And I feel like in that moment, he's trying to win me over. And then he looks away, he takes off his robe and he said, and dancers are comfortable with nudity. He doesn't ask me. He doesn't look at me. It's just a fact in that moment. And he just walks around naked, puts the towel down and lays down. What I think is really important to stop here and just discuss is that was all normalizing bad behavior. That was all. That was normalizing for a 22-year-old that this is just professional. This is what's going to happen.
It sounds like what he was doing was establishing his authority, his assertion.
Yes.
To the point where something that in another situation, if you walked in on, as I'm hearing this, I'm getting a little squeamish and uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
But he had already made the steps to make it sound like that's part of the job. This is what all the other people I hire do. And you want this job, you're going to do it.
Exactly what my friend had been doing. And my first thought was, well, wait, he didn't say anything about nudity. Christine didn't say anything about nudity. And I had just been on an Aretha Franklin video shoot and they had asked me to wear a thong for the video shoot. And I was like, I can't do that because if my grandma sees me, like for me, it was not comfortable. And so, but at the same time, I felt like, oh, but he's saying dancers are comfortable with the nudity and I need to rise to that occasion and I need to be okay with this because he's saying it. And I think that's really important, that imbalance of power and that normalization of bad behavior. And can we just say this out loud and you can move it out? If there should be no penises on a job interview, like, can we just say that there should never be any job where we are seeing body parts like this. And it's, I don't care what kind of job it is. Like if you're doing that should never happen. I can say that now.
Yes.
And the extent that I will go to is I take out my cheat sheet and I start being my little studious self. And I am staying stoic and professional like he had been. And I show him all my moves and I explain the hand positions that I learned from this book and we're talking about massage and then it devolves to, well, there are all these international techniques that devolve into sexual situations, that devolve into sexual jokes. So there was this pushing a line and that's also something I think is really important when we're talking about crime prevention. There's this constant stepping over a line and pushing a boundary and testing testing where your point is of where how far they can push you. So at one point, Jeffrey sits up abruptly and his whole demeanor changes from being joking around and jovial and friendly. He becomes more authoritative and he says, "You're doing it wrong." And I don't want to mistake it. He wasn't mad at me, but he seemed annoyed. And I was not going to get this job because
Right.
I was doing it wrong. And so he was going to have to show me on my body. And he asked me to remove my sundress that I had on, and he was going to show me, and it was just professional and it was not a big deal. If there were 2 points where, looking back at young Jess, that I wish I could have changed, it was first when he took off the robe, and it was that moment when his demeanor changed. Because when his demeanor changed, something in me shut down and I started to freeze and go numb at that point. And I don't know how long it lasted. I can't tell you, but he raped me at that point. After that point, I never related to what people would say about rape, about how they left their body, because that's not what happened for me. For me, it was like I fell back into myself, and it was like being able to see out my eyes was very far away and everything was cloudy. And I don't want this to be happening. Why can't I stop it? And my first thought was like, oh, you're so stupid. Why can't you don't want to be here. You don't want this to be happening. Why can't you just stop it? And what I didn't understand at that time was that I was frozen. I was just frozen and numb, and that was very, very, very common and is a very, very common response. That's what I would tell 22-year-old Jess, is that that's a very common response.
And that's a key question many of us ask ourselves at different moments in time. What would we tell our younger self? But at that moment in time, you are still focused on, living in New York is tough. Somebody trying to break into the performing arts. It's where you are. It's, friends from college tried it. Some of them succeeded, some didn't. And, and you all dream of that perfect day job. And that's your mindset still, right?
It was. Yeah. Yeah. So when he was done, he got up very abruptly, went over to the bathrobe. I heard him take out the dollars and throw them on the table. And he said, "Okay, call my assistant next week for another appointment." So I got the job. And I don't remember putting my clothes back on. I don't remember what happened between him walking out and me getting up and going over to the dollars and feeling like I didn't do anything wrong, but this feels really disgusting right now. And I felt so confused that when I left that apartment and I got on the subway, I got on going the wrong way. I was completely mute, even to the next day going into work. My friend Joanne was I was at Steps on Broadway. I was a scholarship student there, and I was doing the work study program. And I walked in, and she's like, "Hey, how did it go yesterday?" Because she had known about it. How are you? And I couldn't speak, and she asked me 3 times. And when I didn't speak by the 3rd time, she just looked at me and she grabbed my hand and she pulled me into the office. And that's when I just burst out into tears. And I told her what happened. And it was her looking at me and grabbing my shoulder and be like, "We need to go to the police." I didn't even tell her everything that happened because I was too embarrassed. But even in what I told her, Paul, she knew it was bad enough to go to the police. And in that moment was when I learned how bad it was, is when she looked at me and said, "We need to go to the police."
Right.
And I thought, who's going to believe a 22-year-old dancer over this wealthy Wall Street guy? Specifically because I froze. And what I understood about the laws back in 1991 was that it's only determined rape based on how much you resisted. And I technically didn't resist, laid there. And you know this phrase, I laid there like a dead log. Do you remember that phrase from the 80s and 90s? And that phrase, I'm now guessing there were a lot of women that were raped and men knowing it. I froze. So who was going to believe me back then? And I thought that I was the only one. I did not imagine that my friend had gone through this. I assumed it was just me. I couldn't imagine that my friend would have sent me to him if it had happened to her. Yeah. Now I know.
Yeah.
She stayed working for him for like 8 years.
Okay. But yet she still is urging you to go to the police.
No. My friend that
Yo,
sent me,
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, right. Different friend. Right.
My
Your roommate.
roommate,
Your
I
roommate.
could not imagine that it happened to my roommate
Right.
who was telling me to go to
Go.
Jeffrey because
Right.
she spoke about him so kindly.
Right. And it, the sad part, and we want to make this really clear, is sexual assault is the most underreported crime in the US because a lot of people have experienced what you experienced in your mind. The important thing is to go forward. Now, obviously, we're the National Crime Prevention Council and we support victims. We encourage everyone to listen to a victim. The listening part is important. And where we need to make some reforms is the process after that stigmatizes victims and makes it harder and harder for victims to come forward because they fear they're not going to be believed. They fear they won't be listened to. It's important that an environment is established so people feel they're listened to. We
Yeah.
have a very complex criminal justice system
We
that
do.
sorts out fact from fiction,
Yes.
but it's the part before that we have
Yeah.
to protect and have to protect the victims.
Yes. And I have a plan for that we're going to talk about
Yeah,
later.
we're going to get into all of that.
I want to share something with you that took a long time for me to grasp. There's a couple of things, and this is why I'm an advocate now. It's one of a couple of reasons why I talk about what happened, and I try to give as much detail as I'm comfortable with. When I learned about trauma responses, it took my trauma therapist many sessions over many weeks, over many months, for me to grasp that trauma responses are automatic and involuntary, that there was no point that I chose to just stay there, that there's a point where the body recognizes, the brain, the primitive part of the brain recognizes danger before the cognitive executive functioning does. And that part of the brain takes over. It doesn't just bypass that executive functioning, it shuts it down, which is why we get confused. It shuts it down and we either fight, flee, freeze, appease, right? That's involuntary and it's automatic. And it's really important for your listeners to understand that at no point, I still see people saying, you did what you could, you just survived. And I was like, I didn't do what I could. I wasn't capable of doing. My brain and body did. It's as automatic and involuntary as your hand hitting a stove and it popping off automatically. I don't have to think about it and go, oh my goodness, my hand is burning right now. I need to remove that hand.
Right.
That doesn't happen.
Right.
And so it's really important that listeners understand that and why I talk about this is that moment of me freezing destroyed my trust in myself. I thought my body betrayed me. I thought I am not the person I thought I was, this confident, assertive, strong dancer and performing artist out in the city. It destroyed my sense of self, my sense of trust, and my potential in the world cowered. And I describe it as I turned into a mouse of a girl. And that loss happened because I didn't understand freeze.
Mm-hmm. And this is a man who had done this countless times.
And we know this, one of the things that when I opened that drawer and there were a dozen copies of that book, what that tells us is that in 1991, that man was a master manipulator already. There was a strategy down. He was already utilizing tactics to abuse girls and young women in 1991. And that's really important because this case now, the very first person to go to the FBI was Maria Farmer in 1996. And this is how long this case has been going on. And this is how long this infamous predator has been told to the authorities. His name has been given to the authorities and nothing has been done. And this is why victims are up in arms.
Absolutely. And part of it stems and I hold firm to this belief, predatory behavior is enabled.
Yes, exactly.
And because we don't talk about the details
Exactly.
that we want to gloss over, they're uncomfortable details.
Yes.
it's uncomfortable for you to come forward and do this. It took you years to the point before you could get to do that.
7 years of trauma therapy, Paul. 7 years of trauma therapy. I could barely speak it. And I want to be clear, like right now, sharing.
And now anyone listening sees a very strong
Yes.
voice, which
that
we're
wasn't-
great. We're great you got there, but it's also important people have to understand
7 years.
that wasn't natural. That took a lot of work.
And that people think this is hard right now. And I want to assure your audience that this right now, this part is not as hard for me anymore.
You live the hard part already.
The hard part was going through therapy. The hardest part was facing all of the emotions that were shut down, the fears, the blame, the self-blame and the shame, actually facing them. That was the hardest part. I still have a physiological reaction. Like after this, I will be exhausted and have to go to sleep for about 2 hours. Like that's the reality of it. And that's my body still processing a freeze trauma response that has been in my body for 30 years. But it doesn't, I just want to assure everybody so that no one has to pity me. I take really good care of myself.
No. And that part is evident as what we're seeing and hearing from you is a strong person with convictions who wants to help others prevent this. And we're going to get more into that. We're going to have Tracy come on in a little bit and get more into the advocacy side of this, something that is why we're here today. That's really the important part. So as you are watching the news, logging onto your computer and looking at different feeds on social media and other things, that this is now from years ago is now front and center on everyone's minds and everyone's focus. What goes through your mind now?
Well, let me go back to two things. One, in 1991, I thought I was the only one. And it wasn't until Julie K. Brown's Perversion of Justice article that came out in 2018 that I actually saw his face again for the first time and recognized for the first time that it wasn't my fault. That it wasn't my fault, that he had been doing this for a long time. And I think that's really important for people to know that back in 2018, the article that she wrote was all about the sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Epstein got in 2006, where this girls, 13, 14, 15, 16, went to the police, said this man was asking them to come do massages. And he got this, they're calling it the sweetheart deal. The FBI and many law enforcement agencies knew about this man back in 2006. Maria Farmer had talked about it and told them about it 10 years before that. And the reason we are seeing it in the news right now is because the administration came out the weekend of July 4th and said, okay, with all these hundreds of thousands of pieces of evidence, we've decided we're just going to close this Epstein case and we're not going to release the files publicly, even though that had been requested, because what we do know about Jeffrey Epstein is the people that he associated with. He was in obviously elite circles of wealthy men, powerful men and women who were his customers for these girls. And the reason it's coming up now is because after all of this, seeing the news that they are going to shut this down infuriates me as an Epstein survivor, but it infuriates me as an advocate, because as an advocate, I know cases like this rarely make it to conviction. They rarely make it to a courthouse, never mind to a conviction. And with this volume of evidence, if we can't get an investigation for child sex trafficking with all of this information, how is anyone ever going to get a case to court? It's a horrible example of how flawed the justice system is, and it's on a grand global scale. But the other thing that I really want to point out to everyone, so because of Jeffrey Epstein's connections and because of Ghislaine Maxwell bringing those connections to him, she was his co-conspirator. She would go find the girls, much like my roommate brought me to Jeffrey Epstein. It was part of the strategy. A woman bringing him and these wealthy perpetrators, girls, young girls. Everyone around that circle was groomed. So Jeffrey Epstein had people around him that would show up at dinner at his home in his penthouse in New York, and they would never see a single underage girl, because he was able to showcase, hey, look at me, I'm a legitimate, valuable resource to the community. I have these scientists here, I have these artists here, I have these politicians here, I have these really, really influential, powerful people surrounding me. And then at other times, there would be these wealthy men and these connections, and then there would be these young girls that were used as sex slaves. And I think that the point I'm trying to make is that the grooming and enabling happen on different levels. So that grooming was happening to everyone around him to make sure that he was being showcased as this stand-up guy.
It is a complex process.
Yes.
It is something that tragically happens every day somewhere in the US. Sometimes they're rich and famous.
Exactly.
Sometimes they're not. Sometimes, but they use the position of power.
Yes.
Whether it's a wrestling coach or whether it is a dance instructor or a teacher. Exactly. And that is it. They know they have some leverage.
Exactly.
For him, it was his money and connections and friends.
Yes.
And that establishes in the grooming process what is the comfort level to do something which is abhorrent.
And the reason I bring up Ghislaine Maxwell and all this, and you asked me about what is upsetting about the news right now. So this is what's happening for anybody that's not in the loop and is not really following this. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of being a child predator and sex trafficker and co-conspirator with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2021. She is serving a prison sentence right now. This administration not only closed the investigation into the other perpetrators within the Jeffrey Epstein inner circle, only ever arrested one, Ghislaine Maxwell. Instead of talking to the victims, like when there was a big uproar, there was a big public uproar about, wait a minute, we've been waiting for these files to come out. As an administration, you campaigned on this, that you were going to release these files and we were going to know who these horrible men were that were buying children. And then it got shut down. So instead of, after the public uproar, releasing the files, speaking to victims, the administration went to go visit the convicted pedophile in jail, Ghislaine Maxwell, had a sit down with her for 2 days. And after that meeting, changed her designation as an inmate and put her in a luxury, basically a country club for non-sexual offenders in Texas. So they downgraded her labeling as an inmate, and now she is in a country club. That is infuriating on so many levels.
Absolutely.
And it is a disgrace. It is frustrating that Congress is not speaking to us. They're not asking us to testify. In fact, we are having to have congressional members request that we can talk to, like, if you're going to talk to, Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted pedophile, why aren't we also at least speaking to victims and see if they're okay with releasing the Epstein files? And everyone I've spoken to is, you can easily redact those and protect the victims. We are still waiting to hear on that.
The emphasis seems to be on protecting not the victims.
Exactly. And it is extreme.
But the enablers and the groomers, probably.
The enablers, the groomers, the co-conspirator, everyone is being protected and given a spotlight and safety and their voices being heard, while survivors are not being heard. Now, I'm very honored to have been asked to do I've been doing as many interviews as I'm being asked to do for the last several weeks to be able to share what has happened to me, to hopefully get people to understand why this case is so important now and why it is a disservice to every American that this case is back and still going and has never reached any level of accountability and justice. So I'm honored to be here. And I shouldn't have to be. To be honest,
Absolutely.
I shouldn't have to be.
Well, we're honored to have you because, as I point out to many, many times, people look up to McGruff as a hero, and we're happy for that. But I point out he's not a superhero wearing a trench coat. He's just wearing a cape. He's just a dog in a trench coat. It's the people like you who come forward who are the real heroes,
Hmm.
because you are doing exactly what you should be doing, and that is you're speaking up. And like I said, it's the type of crime that will keep perpetuating itself until people really stop and listen and understand the full scope of the damage and trauma and pain that is inflicted.
And
So
it's really important to mention, though, that all of those things are why it's extremely difficult for survivors to speak up. And so that's why they don't. It's not that they should speak up, it's that they physically can't. There's actually an area of the brain that we know now from
we
research,
can't. Right.
the Broca's area that gets damaged. It's very similar to what happens in stroke victims. And so it's impossible for them to speak up. It's a horrible hamster wheel to be on of injustice.
Well, we're gonna have Tracy come on, and we're gonna talk about the Callisto project, and then we're gonna have you come back on too, so we can wrap this up, because I'm excited to see both of you together, because I understand you're a great tag team. Well, Jess was certainly compelling, and we're going to really get into more of the advocacy started. We're really pleased to we're going to be learning more about the Callisto project and what they've got going on from their head, Tracy Tomasi. Tracy, thanks for joining us. Great to have you with us. So tell us a little bit about the Callisto project, but I always like to hear before what happened. What was in your mind that led to this important organization being started?
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me and to talk to Jess and to talk to me about the advocacy work that we do. You know, I did not found Callisto. Jess Ladd did, and she was brilliant, and she was a survivor of sexual assault on a college campus. And she wanted to solve that issue. And she looked at the statistics of 90% of sexual assaults on college campuses are committed by serial perpetrators who, on average, offend 6 times while in college. And so she figured if she could figure out a way to connect at least 2 of those people, there'd be a better chance of accountability. And if you connect 2 and there's accountability of that perpetrator before it gets to 6, you can reduce college sexual assault by 59%. And so that is really what we are working to do. And I became the CEO about 3.5 years ago, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker who has been working in gender-based violence for about 25 years. I actually started my career as a therapist for adolescent sex offenders. And so I know that prevention comes from holding perpetrators accountable. And I think that in the 25 years that I've done this work, we've talked to people about, cover your drink, don't walk at night, do all of this stuff. And while that can reduce your risk, it's not going to prevent something from happening, because it's really about the perpetrator. And we need to really talk about the perpetrators and what they're doing and giving people a voice. You heard Jess's story, and she thought she was the only one for so many years. And yet Jeffrey Epstein did that to so many, and the grooming happened. And so many of the survivors, not just with Epstein, but everybody really thinks it's their fault and that they're the only one. And then so many times they're not. And so what we do at Callisto is that we have built encrypted technology to help connect survivors of serial perpetrators. And so anybody in the U.S. and its territories with a .edu email address has free access. So whether you're a student, you're a faculty member or staff or an alumni, if you have .edu email, you have free access. And what you can do if you're wondering if your perpetrator has harmed somebody else is that you go and you create an account, a free account, and then you put in the state where the assault occurred. And that's because sexual assault laws vary by state. And you put in a unique identifier of your perpetrator. So your perpetrator's social media handles, email address, phone number. There's about 12 different things that you can put in, and you put in as many as you know. And that's what we use to match on. And again, it's all encrypted. So everything is encrypted before it hits our servers even. So it's very secure. And what happens is that if 2 people put in the same Instagram handle, let's say, there's a match. It's not like a dating site, so you're not notified right away. We get notified, but we make sure to take security so seriously that the survivor information and the perpetrator information is also encrypted from us. What we can see is the state where the assault occurred and any accessibility needs that the survivor has, including language. And we then assign that case to a free confidential advocate who is trauma informed, and they reach out to the survivors separately. And the survivors have a choice along the way. We really make sure to put the survivors in the center of this. And the survivor has a choice to meet with that advocate or not. If they choose to meet with the advocate, they will tell what happened to them for the first time, and then get options. They'll learn their options. So, what is a criminal case option? What is a civil case option? What is a Title IX option? What are mental health options? What does it look like if you blast your perpetrator's name on social media? And what are the legal ramifications against that? And so they get all of that information. And then if they're wanting to, and they consent to it, and all the survivors consent, that advocate will work to connect the survivors for the survivors to pursue healing and justice, whatever that means for them. And so we're not investigating what happened. We're not reporting to police, Title IX, or HR what happened. We're really about empowering those survivors for those survivors to make the best decision for them, which includes reporting if they want. And we know that there is strength in numbers. We can see that with Jeffrey Epstein. We can see that with Me Too. We can see that with all of the big cases. And typically in the past, it's journalists, like how Jess found out she wasn't the only one. It's journalists doing that work. But that only happens if you have an Epstein type of perpetrator. And if you have an average person on a college campus that the news and the media isn't going to care about, that isn't going to come to that surface, and those survivors aren't going to be connected. And we can see in the media how unsafe it is for many survivors to be connected in the media and to put their name out publicly. It's not easy. I mean, I talk to Jess almost every day, and I can tell you that there are days that it's really, really difficult for her and for other survivors, anybody who is brave enough to put their name out there.
Let's talk about the college campus environment for a minute, and the different, as we were talking about with Jess, there's an uncomfort level. I'm guessing, obviously, this type of thing is not something a college campus is going to include in their admissions brochure, and probably is not too fond of news coverage that might focus on something happening on their campus or with their students, or certainly with their faculty. Yet that is just the thing that is going to draw public attention and awareness that will ultimately stop the problem. So what response have you been getting from colleges, or if any?
Yeah, it's really mixed. You know, when we first started this, when Jess Ladd first started this, it was really about a tool to sell to Title IX. And we switched that. And now that we have taken the universities out of allowing them to have access and allowing survivors to have access to this, because survivors asked us that they wanted something before Title IX and before reporting. And there's certain schools that really work with us to promote it to their students, and they have it on their website, and they have it for first year orientation, and they let people know about it. And there's other colleges that will not return our calls, that say absolutely not, we don't want students to promote it. You know, there's a lot of varieties of reasons of why they state that. There might be confusion as to a student may think they're reporting to Title IX if they use Callisto. We're very clear. We are a neutral third-party nonprofit, just like a rape crisis center.
Well, for those colleges who won't return your call, maybe we can compare notes after this episode, and we'll have McGruff start barking at them.
Please, that would be fantastic, because I mean, I think to your point is that colleges have pretended that they're safe by covering it up. And it does become a big PR issue and people think it's unsafe. But I've told many, many parents along the way of ask these questions when you're college trips with your kids, ask the questions. And if they have 0 sexual assaults reported, they're covering it up. The reporting process is terrible. And that's going to be more traumatic when your child is assaulted. And, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 15 men, and 1 in 6, I think, trans and non-binary students are assaulted every year on college campuses. And right now, the beginning of school till November, we're entering what's been deemed as the red zone, which is where most of the sexual assaults happen in a year, is that first couple of months of school. When students are drinking, they're going to parties, they are away from home for the first time.
They're trying to make friends for the first time. It's there's a lot going through a student's mind. You may be 18 or 19 and considered an adult. Scientists tell us the brain isn't fully formed until you're about 25.
Yeah.
There's a lot happening. That all leads to what Jess talks about are these moments of vulnerability where you can become lured, you can become groomed, you can become susceptible to someone who is a predator. And as you point out, someone isn't a predator by accident or by mistake. They're a predator time and time again. So tell us, so if you're a college student out there listening, what should you do?
You can go to callistovault.org and log in to create a free account. If you're looking for more information before doing that, you can go to our website, which is projectcallisto.org, or you can follow us on Instagram at Callisto. And when you're ready, create an account. And as soon as you enter into matching, you'll be in there and you have access to all the data. So you can delete it whenever you want and whenever that feels safe for you.
Great. Great. And so we want to cover a little bit more before we bring Jess back on. So as you're talking and I'm thinking this through a little bit, and the goal is to take what we know. We know the average predator is going to do this about 6 times. We know that tend to focus in areas where they have victims. It goes back to the old adage by the infamous bank robber Willie Sutton when he was asked, "Why do you rob banks?" That's where the money is. Why does a child predator prey on college campuses? That's where the young men and women are. And so we know those facts. What are the roadblocks? What's the roadblock? Why is someone saying, is it simply people just don't want to deal with some of life's hard realities? Why do people resist talking about this, bringing it more out in the public?
I think a lot of it is confusion as to what sexual assault is. I think that a lot of people, Jess talked about this too, where in the 90s, to be considered raped, you had to fight and you had to scream, and we didn't take into account the freeze response. But I also think that a lot of particularly college students, they're under the impression from watching shows like Law & Order SVU that it is a stranger jumping out of a bush and, or somebody in a parking garage that you have to protect yourself from. And it's not the guy that you're dating, and it's not the coach that you trust, and it's not your friend's roommate that your friend trusts, And I think that so much of this comes around power. And there's trust built around this. And so you get in a situation where maybe you're at a party and you're flirting with a guy and you think, oh, I can trust this guy. And then they continue to feed you alcohol. Maybe you're voluntarily drinking that alcohol. And then what happens is that we talk about it on college campuses of they took advantage of her. Taking advantage is just code word for assaulting somebody, because you're taking advantage of that power dynamic.
Right.
You're taking advantage of that weakness, and it's very evident. And I think that there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of, I didn't know if it was rape. I didn't know if it was sexual assault. And I think that that's how colleges get away with not holding perpetrators accountable. They often trust the perpetrator who said, oh, it was consensual, or, I didn't do it, or I wasn't there. And then they just leave that be rather than doing a bigger investigation. I know that there's a lot of survivors who have reported it and then had to go through relationship classes, abusive relationship classes as the victim, having to go through that, And so I think that there's a lot of good people that work in the systems. I think there's a lot of terrible people that work in the systems too, but I think the systems are terrible. If you look back at the case of Larry Nassar, who was the USA gymnastics doctor and a doctor at Michigan State University, he was reported in 96 and 97 and 2000 and 2004 and all these times to both Michigan State University's Title IX department, as well as the police department in East Lansing. Nothing happened. What happens is they close the case and then that goes away. And the next person reports and they think, oh, well, if he was reported before, we would know that and it would flag something. But that case went away. So they didn't know. And criminals, the systems are not working.
Criminals thrive in darkness, and shining the light on them is going back to McGruff's very first public service announcement on television in 1980. Leave your porch light on. Crooks don't like lights. They make them nervous. Crooks don't like people who speak up. It makes them nervous. College campuses are not going to like getting a letter from McGruff saying, don't sweep this under the rug. That's why we're here. That's what we're going to do. We're going to bring Jess back on in a minute. But before she comes back on, do you have any words that we should be keeping in our head as we listen to the two of you talk?
I think the most important thing is that when you're thinking about perpetrators, they're really charismatic. They're your brother, they're your cousin, they're your friend, they're your coach, they're your clergy member. They're really charismatic, and they're really good at when you shine a light on them. They're good at being the light and convincing you that they are not the problem. I think that's the case with Jeffrey Epstein, is that he was really charismatic. A lot of people really liked him, and I think that hurts survivors for us to really think that perpetrators are either all evil or all good, because they're both. Cosby was both. Epstein was both. Weinstein was both. Nasser was both. And I think it's really important to remember that we're talking about really well-liked, charismatic people.
And even down to a more simpler level, as you point out, it's that clergy member, it's the teacher, it's people who are given some what society would characterize as authority, respect, and all of that, but also have this other part of their brain that is criminal. And separating the two is difficult, as you point out. It's not being taken advantage of. It's the other person broke the law. And there is, our perspective is there is nothing woke about putting a rapist behind bars. And there's nothing woke about telling someone they're a criminal.
Agreed.
And it's when we mince words, it's when we create that confusion that makes people think, well, maybe they're wrong. No, you're not wrong. Someone breaks a crime is a crime is a crime. You break it, you need to pay the price, because that's the only way we can keep justice. Well, I hope for all those listening that you're learning a lot. I know I sure am. And what we want to do is, because Jess and Tracy, as pointed out already, they talk almost every day. They're on top of this. They're doing the speaking circuit. They are just out there, which is what we need. So we want to get the two of them to interact. So Jess, welcome back.
Thank you.
And as you were back there listening to Tracy, what were some of the key points that were running through your mind about the importance of her work at the Callisto Project and your organization, your app? What are the key things people really should be taking away from this?
Thank you. There's something that you said earlier about there's something that needs to happen before reporting happens. And Tracy said the same. There's something that needs to happen before reporting to police happens. And I think what is unique about what Tracy and I both do is we are that piece. The two of us and what we're doing. My company is not a nonprofit. It's actually a for-profit public benefit corporation. And both Tracy and I think I can speak for it. We believe that it is going to take different types of solutions to change what's happening now, because the solutions that have been in place aren't working. And we believe technology could have a really important part of that. The other thing that I want to say is that step that happens before reporting is around the idea of just believing survivors, victims of this crime, when they tell you it has happened, and that you don't need details. You don't even have to define whether it qualifies as a crime. You don't need details about what happened. You can just believe someone when they tell you that they've been harmed. And that's the premise of what I'm doing, and why I not only am partnering with Tracy and Callisto, but why I've been advocating for Callisto for a very long time, because we need these different ways of dealing with this system. Because somebody said to me something really eloquent. The system's not broken. It was actually designed this way. So we have to work outside the systems.
Right. When we talk about justice, the image that comes to mind is the scale. And what we're doing right now is we're giving criminals a chance. And so we're tipping the scale.
Exactly.
We need to give the victims the chance.
Exactly.
And that's what's going to balance the scale back out.
Exactly.
And that needs to happen outside the justice system.
Outside
Absolutely.
the justice system. Yes.
And I want to hear from both of you on technology, because oftentimes we hear about the harms of technology, and we are among those beating that drum, because there are certainly harms from it, but ultimately, you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. The technology out there. It's important that we have to learn how to harness the technology for good. And so I want to get into that and how you're using technology. Tracy, you're using encrypted technology and some other things. And Jess, you've got an app. Let's get into that.
Okay.
Tell us about the technology side of this.
Well, I was just going to say, I explained Callisto already, but I think the important thing is that you have to put survivors in the center when you're using technology. And when you don't center survivors, that's when it becomes dangerous. And that's when it goes awry. And so at Callisto, we have locked ourselves out of key data that people want, that hurts our funding because of it, because data is key, right? Data is money these days, but data is a security issue. and a confidentiality issue for survivors. And so that's why we have these intense levels of encryption and security. And we work with some of the leading crypto folks in the US to be able to do this. But we always put survivors at the center. We're always thinking, how are perpetrators and how are people who don't want us to exist going to try to break into our system? And we have a lot of different ways to prevent that. And we think about that a lot. And I mean, Jess and I talk about this all the time of how can we use this feature? What feature, what are the unintended consequences of making this new feature? And I think that it's just really, really important to maintain being trauma informed, which means that it doesn't go as quick as building it, and being survivor centered. And that is the opposite of most technology that is out there.
Absolutely. But what your example is showing is it can be done.
Absolutely.
Uh,
The T
and
app
the-
was
the
something that
trade-offs.
was, there's absolute trade-offs, and it's difficult, but there's an app called the T app, which was trying to keep women safe by like rating men, and if you're at online dating, you could go onto this app and rate men and warn women about other men. And I can't even call it a security breach, because men found out about this, were mad, and tried to hack their system, and they found an open server without a password with all of this information about women, including their driver's license, and those men doxed it. And it's because they didn't really think about survivors in that, and they didn't think about their safety protocols in all of that. And we do, and that's why it's taken us a long time to build this, a long time to do all of this. And we work with a lot of experts in order to make sure that we're not cutting corners just to get 1 million users and to get money from it.
It's the revenue proposition that a lot of companies have set up that drive their algorithms, whether or not it's driving them for good or evil. That's irrelevant, and what you're doing is making it relevant. Jess, tell us about your app.
Thank you. So our app is in development. It hasn't launched yet. We're actually launching the MVP, the very first version, in the fall, in November, at a university. And it's a really simple premise. One of the things that I noticed a huge gap in is that people didn't treat sexual assault like it was an injury. They automatically treated it like and when you treat it automatically like a crime, you miss this moment where someone is injured. And I'm talking about the physiological nervous system brain injury that is happening in that moment when we are stuck in that fight, flight, freeze, appease mode. And what our body really needs is safety in that moment. And typically what happens is somebody says, let's go to the police. That is, and they bring them to another potentially unsafe place where they are interrogated. So the premise of our app is that sexual assault is an injury first before it is an interrogation. And we treat it that way. And to give you an example of that, if I came to you, if I called you, Paul, and I said, oh my gosh, I went out last night to this party and I was raped. Your first response typically would be, we have to go to the police, right? Or even the hospital. And the hospital, people don't understand, the hospital is for evidence collecting. A forensic kit is an evidence collection. It is not for the traumatic experience happening for that survivor. But if I told you, Paul, oh my gosh, I was in a car accident last night, your first response would be, are you okay? Do you need anything? Can I come see you? It's a different response. And so our app is all about teaching people to know what to do when someone says me too. The name of the app is called With You Too. And what we found when we started doing our research, our focus groups, our surveys, our interviews with young people is that they didn't just struggle getting help in an emergency. They actually are struggling asking for help every single day. And so our app is really focused on 3 premises: that if we find our safe people, we know who's safe to ask for help, whether it's calm and just a really bad day, or whether it's a crisis. And if we commit, we make a pact to be there for each other, these 3 or 4 people in my inner circle, my people. And then if I know what to do, meaning I have a plan. So it's people who make a pact and know where the safety plan is and how to engage in that safety plan. And in that safety plan, part of the app is our sexual assault first aid kit. So we all know what to do if something happens. We are going to prevent the long-term damage that is happening, and then hopefully get people to hold someone's hand while they use, for example, Callisto. so that that person isn't by themselves, because 9 times out of 10, a victim is dealing with every single decision and option out there all by themselves. And that is part of the lack of justice. There's misinformation. They believe it's their fault. They're trying to navigate all of the options with a traumatized brain. And then the minute they try to disclose to someone, if that person says something that is not trauma informed, it can shut you down. I experienced that, and it's an awful feeling. And so this idea came around when I recognized that after Sandy Hook, we have active shooter drills in every single school in our country. And yet our children are more likely to experience sexual assault than ever be in an active shooter experience, even at the rates we're experiencing it in our country. And we have nothing. We have no safety plans. We have no stop, drop, and roll. We have no protocol at all. As a parent, as a peer, as a teacher, as an administrator, there's no specific protocol of how do I just care for this person? How do I
Right.
care for them? How do I help them overcome this injury?
Well, what you're really doing is you're telling people get your heads out of the sand,
Yeah.
which is critical, because not talking about it is what is causing the damage. And
But it has to be safe. We don't know who safe
Yeah.
we have to
people
do
are.
it right. We have to
We have
do it in the right way, of
yeah.
course.
Yeah. And
I-
and there's more damage that happens by the people we love and trust than even police officers. And I can't overemphasize that people expect, and typically what I see happen is that people go, oh, my so-and-so's daughter, had a sexual assault. And they're like, she needs to go to a therapist. She needs to go somewhere else, to some other stranger, to some other person, and get help. And the people surrounding a victim don't think they have any responsibility or degree of expertise on a professional level to be able to help, and they are wrong. And that's what we do. Everyone thinks our app is for victims. It's not. It's literally for everyone else.
That support network is so critical.
Exactly.
Because there are different, as you pointed out, there are different phases to going through this process.
Exactly.
There's the first step of, are you okay? What can we do? What can others do? Then there's that, if they decide to go the route of pushing for prosecution, that's not a quick process by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
They need help along the way.
And Callisto then can come in and be that safety net where someone can just write out, Tracy, you can say this better than I can, about the incident report, So what we are doing is we're setting them up with the network, and then Tracy saying, here's the next step before you even decide to do anything else.
Tracy, those next
Yeah.
steps, tell us more.
Well, I want to go back to really quick is that Jess mentioned stop, drop, and roll. Like, I have never had to stop, drop, and roll. I don't know anybody that has had to stop,
Nope.
drop, and roll, but it's really important. It's something that we're taught. I have been trained in first aid and CPR. I've never had to do CPR. But what I have had to do is sit with friends and family and strangers who have disclosed sexual assault. I've had to sit with friends who've experienced somebody telling them for the first time, and they say, Tracy, what do I say?
Yes.
That happens all the time, which is why Jess's app is so important. And I've seen it, and it is incredible, especially as a licensed clinical social worker who's been doing this work for 25 years. It's exactly what's needed. And I think part of it is that the next step, when you enter into Callisto, either if you're entering into matching, you're putting it somewhere. And so in the past, it's been I report or I don't report. And that's been the dichotomy. And now it's I can say that I did something, because so many survivors say I would have reported or I did report if I knew that they were going to continue to do this to somebody else or to prevent it from happening to somebody else. It becomes about prevention rather than themselves. And some people do report because of themselves. And I think that is absolutely great. But I also think, to Jess's point of, we also have an incident log where you can just document what happened to you in a really trauma-informed way. And it goes through the who, the what, the where, the when, the why. And that's all encrypted as well. And the only person who ever has access to that is the person with the password. And it timestamps it. So if you want to then share that later to say, I documented this at this date, you have proof of that. And I think that just knowing that your experience is locked somewhere, that nobody else can see it, but that it's gotten out of you, can absolutely be a next step that survivors really need. And they need to know that, we did a survey of our users, and 90% of them said that they feel more secure just knowing that Callisto exists, because they know that an organization is thinking about this problem that they have in their head. And that alone is empowering to survivors.
Absolutely. And it's empowerment that is what the perpetrators, what the criminals are going to fear, because what they're doing is they're using their sense of power to victimize. And
Yeah.
this is a way of victims fighting back. Jess and Tracy, you both told me you make a great tag team, and that's pretty clear. What other collaborations do we need out there?
That's a great
Yeah.
question.
We
Tracy,
need
you
so
get that.
many. Yeah, well, I mean, Jess and I have done a lot of work with I Have the Right To, which is another organization that really works to educate schools from all levels, from kindergarten through college. You know, we all have our pieces where Jess is helping with the allies and the friends, and we're helping survivors, and they're helping with education around it. And we all need to be in this together. The systems are siloed, the resources are siloed, and Jess and I are doing a lot to really partner with as many organizations as possible to, like your own, to break down those silos, because perpetrators rely on those silos.
Absolutely. Jess, your thoughts there?
I just agree with everything that Tracy said.
We got to build a bigger tent.
Yeah, and the collaboration piece, people don't recognize how little money actually goes to, for example, crisis centers to deal with this crisis in that moment. And now it's potentially a lot less than it had been in the past. And so, and survivors don't I had friends that called crisis centers. They made 2 to 3 different calls, and all of the numbers were disconnected. We need better systems of collaboration for this to work. We have to start talking to each other, nonprofits working together, but there's been such a limit on money, and there's been such a limit on resources, like human power, to do that. And that's why another reason why I think with technology, we can scale support.
Absolutely. And I think that is a big part of it. The criminals naturally take advantage of weaknesses and vulnerabilities. The lack of resources is a vulnerability, but it's not the be all and end all when you think more creatively and use what we have already more effectively. We need to do more of that. I have to say, in way of wrapping up this very informative conversation, I want to go back to a point each of us made, and that is the importance of talking about this and the barrier of fear of talking about it. My takeaway is I feel energized by you both in the work you're doing, because you are giving victims a voice. You are standing up. You're creating new methods, new processes that people throughout the criminal justice system can use. And when I talk to folks who've gone through the system, I ask them, well, there's this feeling that they didn't feel the system worked right. I said, well, did the police officers do a great job? Did they fall down on the job? No, I had the best police officer. She understood what I was going through and was professional and knew what to do and called my house afterwards. And, well, what about the prosecutor and the district attorney? Oh, no, they were great too. It's sort of, but yet there's something missing in the system that we have to fill in those gaps. And what you're doing is that. I thank you both, not only for joining us today, but for what you're going to do tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that and the day after that. And for our listeners and viewers, please click like and subscribe. Visit our website. We're going to have lots of resources, lots of follow-up on this. So thank you both for joining us. Thank you all out there for listening and tuning in.
That's an easy way to take a bite out of crime.